Good afternoon, students. Let's get started with Confederation. Ready, set, and go. All right, so today we are going to get through Confederation. So this is it. We're kind of at the home stretch. We are going to finish Chapter 2, thank goodness, and we will be rolling on. We're going to kind of do some weird things in the next little while. We're going to skim the prairies, and then we will come back to it again later. So today, Confederation. So we are going to confederate all of those wonderful little colonies, or most of the little colonies. Well, at least a couple of the little colonies, and it's going to be exciting. Pop quiz, though. Who's that guy right there? You probably recognize him because you've seen his face before many times. Every single time you've taken a $10 bill out of your pocket. Or that guy. Same guy. It's an artist's rendition of that guy. So today, this guy is going to whip all these little kids into shape and turn them into one amazing country called Canada. Let's go. So, British North America. At the time, pre-Confederation, you have all these various British colonies. You have the West Canada, you have the East Canada, you have New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland, and all of these different places are their own colony. They're all separate. They're kind of like their own little country. They're running things their own way. They're making their own decisions, and they like it that way. So yeah, they have their own economies, they have their own governments with their own legislatures, and they have their own set of ties back to Britain. So when this whole idea of Confederation comes along, they're like, we're happy. What do we need that for? So that's going to be the problem that we're trying to overcome this time. It certainly was the problem that John A. MacDonald was trying to overcome. All right, so when Confederation gets proposed to them, they just want to know, how is it going to benefit us? So if you're living in Nova Scotia at the time and John A. MacDonald sends a telegram and says, hey, come join us, we're going to make this amazing new country. And you're like, well, Nova Scotia's cool. We're happy. I like it here in Halifax. I'm super content here as a trailer park boy. And then gradually, it becomes apparent that, you know what, even Nova Scotia, even the trailer park boys could benefit from Confederation. Believe it or not. All right, so the federal government. You know what federal government means? That's the one that kind of runs the whole country. John A. MacDonald, our dear friend and favorite grandpa-looking guy, he wanted a strong federal government. So this is one of the things. He's like, well, let's unite all of these colonies. We'll have one country, and that one country will have one government, and that one government will make important decisions for everybody. And that will result in limited powers for the provinces. So yes, wonderful. Come on over, Nova Scotia. We will make the decisions for you, because that's what you want. Actually, they kind of didn't agree. The people of the various colonies, particularly the politicians, disagreed. They said, no, man, like, we're Nova Scotians first. We could join Canada, but we want to run our own colony. Or province, as it will soon be known. So most people, shockingly, did not want to be ruled by Central Canada. And if you think about it, in the 21st century, we kind of still don't. Canada's a really big place, and it's really diverse, and everybody's a little bit different, and the economy and the climate and the geography is all going to be a little bit different. And so having decisions made for you by people in Ontario doesn't make everyone all that happy. We get frustrated even today because, hey, you know, the CBC focuses too much on Ontario and Quebec. We get frustrated because Toronto Maple Leafs hockey games get all of the press time during hockey night in Canada, and we have to wait and get the sucky commentators and all that kind of stuff. So this problem still goes on today, so hopefully we can kind of understand where people were coming from. So the Maritime Provinces, and if you're not sure what the Maritime Provinces are, write this down. Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland. These colonies see themselves as mature and independent colonies. we're mature. We're old enough. We've made our own decisions. We're sophisticated. We are independent. We don't need no Canada to tell us what to do. And so they've got their own responsible government and their own way of running things. They've got elections, and they're pretty happy with things. They have their own trade relations with the United States and with Britain. And so things are generally pretty good. So there's no real motivation to join this new confederation, this new country. And so they're reluctant as this process comes along. And now Newfoundland, this one's really interesting. Newfoundland had even no trade with Canada. So really, they're so connected to Britain and the United States, they're so independent in their government, that this whole idea of joining Canada just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. There's no economic benefit, there's no political benefit, so why would they do it? They're still willing to listen, but there's no major motivation to pull them there. And the other thing, that's the other part, is that one of the big carrots that Canada is waving in front of everyone's face is this idea of a railway. If we can create a railway to unite these colonies, then everyone will be happy because their goods will travel across Canada and there will be more people to buy your stuff and all that kind of great stuff. But if you live in Newfoundland or PEI, you've got a big body of water between you and whatever railway this is going to be. So there's really no economic benefit to Newfoundland or PEI from a railway. All right, so changing economics. Please don't, if your parents walk by and they're like, that's not how you spell economics, tell them that I know and I understand. I was just trying to get your attention. So changes in the relations with the United States and Britain. So remember those corn laws, and remember the trade agreements that were starting to change after the American Civil War. These things resulted in some major changes for the various colonies. So the end of the corn laws, that affects everybody, especially the people of Canada West and Canada East, but also the people of New Brunswick and the people of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and all of those other places. Everybody suddenly affected by the changing economy, and the economy is becoming depressed. There is a depression affecting Canada, and so your money's not worth as much, and life is getting a little bit harder than it used to be. And so John A. MacDonald decided, okay, this is our opportunity, this is our time. So me and my guys, we're going to go out and we're going to help those other colonies see that the solution to their problems is a union. Cool? So this is a little quote from our dear friend John A. MacDonald. I say that there is a deliberate conspiracy by force, by fraud, or by both to force Canada into the American Union. I have to say I should have said that way more slurry and maybe a little bit drunk. That would have been more John A. MacDonald's way. But yeah, so there's also this discussion, and he's going to use this a whole bunch of times. He's going to be like, guys, we got to worry because America is going to come in and they're going to take us by force. So we have to confederate, otherwise we'll be weak and they'll pick us off one by one. So there's a lead up, but we're going to get to some conferences. So here you go. This is the lead up to the conferences. So because of those corn laws and because of the American Civil War, there's this uncertainty in Canada West and Canada East. And the other problem is, of course, they have that ineffective government because they're always debating and always fighting. So then John A. MacDonald has power, and then George Brown has power, and then Cartier has power. And so it's back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and everybody's just getting frustrated. And so the solution for the Canadas is some sort of confederation. We just have to make those colonies start to agree. In the two Canadas, in United Canada, there had been 12 different governments in 15 years. That just, when you think about that, we generally change governments every 4 years. These guys are doing it almost every single year. And that's getting frustrating. So every time you're like, okay, I voted, now we have a new leader, and then a few months later, they're like those guys over in the Parliament, they're yelling at each other again. Oh, government dissolves, you got to vote again. So it means not very much is getting done because they're always fighting. And every time they fight, they have to dissolve the parliament and start again. So it's getting frustrating not just for the parliamentarians, but it's frustrating for the everyday citizens who are voting. Because the reason you vote is so that your government can start doing the things you want them to do. If every time you vote them in, they fight and then can't do the thing that you want them to do so that they have to go to another election, you get a little bit exhausted. All right, so here's the fairly clever solution. You want to get the government working together? You got to get different parties working together. So John A. MacDonald manages to get George Brown and Cartier all together into a coalition, which they call the Great Coalition. That should be bold. Please write that down. So George Brown, John A. MacDonald, and Cartier all join together and form a coalition with the effort to try and save Canada. Which is awesome, because remember, if you recall back the other day, there were these four parties, and they're always fighting, and they're always disagreeing on everything, and ultimately, if they can kind of put their differences aside and kind of start working together, then maybe some things will get done. So, John A. MacDonald is willing to consider the needs of the French people, and the French people are willing to maybe make a couple of concessions, and George Brown finally gets persuaded to join them a little bit in doing this. Now things can start to kind of move along. And so, as a result of forming this coalition, and kind of agreeing that Confederation is the solution to the problem, they decide to organize some conferences so that they can hammer out the details of the Union. So let's have some conferences, let's invite all the colonies together, let's all hash it out and look at the pros and cons of Confederation, and let's win them over and make a union. It's kind of a beautiful thing. All right, so the first conference is the Charlottetown Conference. This is the one, oddly, that I always remember. If you were ever to be like, if you gave me Canadian trivia about a thing, I would almost, like, if I didn't know the answer, I would probably just say Charlottetown Conference. It has stuck with me for 25 years, I would guess. So the first conference in 1864 was the Charlottetown Conference in Charlottetown, PEI. This particular meeting, it was actually meant originally for only the maritime colonies. The various leaders of the maritime colonies, they were going to get together and they were going to negotiate maybe uniting together. So you'd have the United Canadas and then you'd have the United Maritimes. But John A. MacDonald and his coalition dudes, they decided to crash the party and join in. And so they came along and they brought their friend Alexander Tilloch Grant, the guy in charge of building railways. And so all together, those three plus the railway guy and the leaders of the Maritime Provinces, they all got together and they looked at the pros and cons of a federation and kind of hashed it out. And so it was a fairly successful conference. As a result, they decided that they should have another conference. So they had the Quebec Conference in Quebec City. The leaders of New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and PEI agreed to meet again with the Canadians at another conference in Quebec. As I previously said, notice that somebody is missing. Who is it? We've got New Brunswick, we've got Nova Scotia, we have PEI, we are missing Newfoundland. And that's going to be important a little bit later. Hey, look at that. Newfoundland also came, but they weren't super keen on this whole thing of Confederation. The actual voters of Newfoundland kind of sent a message to the leaders that Confederation, this isn't for us. You can go look, but don't touch. And so, at the conference in Quebec in 1864, delegates planned a brand new nation. So the Quebec Conference is finally where they hash it all out, they work out the details, and decide, we're going to make a country. It's kind of beautiful. And so all the provinces, they were going to retain certain powers. So way back, remember I said John A. MacDonald, he wanted a powerful federal government. These guys said, sorry, John, no. We're not going to have a powerful federal government. The provinces are going to retain certain powers. And John A. MacDonald's like, I don't like it, but I'm willing to agree. Because really, the ultimate goal was Confederation. All right. The hard part with this whole thing, though, was that there was resistance in each of the various colonies, or soon-to-be provinces. So each delegation, they returned to their various legislatures in their colonies. After going to the Quebec and Charlottetown conferences, they said, okay, we got this great plan. We're going to confederate. It's going to be awesome. All of these places, we're going to make one country. We're going to have a federal government, and life's going to get better. And we still get to make certain decisions about our own economic policy and laws and all that kind of stuff. We're going to have a provincial government. Life's going to be good. That's the plan. So when they get back, when the guy from New Brunswick comes home, he says, okay, we're going to confederate, and it's going to be awesome. The people of the various colonies said, hang on here. I don't know that that's such a good idea. And so each colony had to kind of work through all these different kinds of issues. People got really cheesed off about this whole thing. There was a lot of debate, particularly debate over the role of the federal government. Hey, man, should they be allowed to make taxes? Should they be allowed to make laws that affect us all? Should we not have different laws? All that kind of stuff. Then they also argued about where should the capital of Canada be? Maybe it should be in Toronto. Maybe it should be in Kingston. Maybe it should be in Montreal. And so lots of these different things, these debates kind of raged on for a good while. And then the other one was about the railway. Who's going to pay for the railway? Should the provinces pay for the railway? Should the federal government pay for the railway? Maybe we should make a tax. Maybe we should make all the farmers pay for the railway. All of that kind of stuff. And so this didn't just, it wasn't just like, okay, Quebec Conference happens and we are now Canada. They had to go back. They had to kind of hash it out. They had to argue for a while. And then, of course, you have people like the guy who drew this comic who were kind of critical of this whole idea of a united Canada. So if the little comment here says Mother Britannia. So here we go. That's Mother Britannia, England. It says, see why the dear child can stand alone. So there's Canada standing alone. Look at us. We're so great. And Uncle Sam, you know who Uncle Sam is, I hope. He's like, of course he can. Let him go, Granny. If he falls, I'll catch him. Dun, dun, dun. So even then, as kind of continues today, people of Canada are really concerned that, America does have a pretty heavy influence on Canada. And, oh man, there was a super famous, news reporter lady who said that, if America wanted, they could just roll over and take Canada. And, that sort of started a big argument and it became a big hot mess. But, I mean, that's not totally different from some of the stuff Donald Trump says nowadays. All right, so the next, and I think maybe even the last thing we need to talk about is the BNA, which stands for the British North America Act. So finally, after all of this debating, all of these conferences, all of this kind of fiddly stuff, so right, because remember, the Quebec Conference is in 1864, so it takes a couple years of arguing and hashing things out. Finally, all of the delegates of New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and the United Canadas, they decide to get together and join as one nation and ask Britain for permission in the year 1866, when the British government would pass the British North America Act, in which it became its own country, the Union of Canada, an act for the Union of Canada, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick, and the government thereof. Notice that once again, we are missing a name from the list. Who are we missing this time? We've got New Brunswick, we've got Nova Scotia, we don't have Newfoundland, we have the Canadas, but we don't have Prince Edward Island. So even though they'd been part of the Quebec Conference, they were kind of willing to negotiate and participate, they made the decision not to join into the new united British North America, soon to be known as Canada. And so, that's an odd way of displaying this. So there still are some issues. So we do get there. We're at the point now where we have a confederation. We've got this approval from Britain. Everybody in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Canada are full of hope and fairly happy with the end result. But it's really important to note that the First Nations people of these colonies did not have a seat at the table. That's super important for Canadian history. So from 1866 to present, that is an important thing that we have to kind of be aware of. That is a lingering consequence. The First Nations people were not at the table. Their needs were not considered in Confederation. And so we're gonna talk about that more as we go forward. But notice that there's a continued kind of lack of input from First Nations people in shaping and structuring Canadian society. The other thing to think about in all of this is, where were the women in all of this? Where are the women in the pictures? Where are the women who are influencing and shaping all of this? What about even the most basic thing? Where are the wives of the people in these pictures? And so it's really important to note that women, despite the fact that they were not present, despite the fact that they did not have representation in all of this, there are historians who are going back and looking at the role that the wives of these people played at this, and it's actually super, super interesting. So the wives, despite the fact that all these guys are wheeling and dealing and making deals and contracts and negotiating about railways and who should get what and what the powers of the provinces should be and whether or not the French should have influence and what that influence should be and whether they should have schools and all this other kind of stuff, there are historians who are looking at the influence that the wives had, and the wives seem to have played some really interesting parts in all of this. The wives seem to have helped kind of keep the coalition alive, to help kind of cement the treaties that were coming along, to get people back at the meeting table, to kind of diffuse the hot heads and animosity that was going on. So I would highly, highly encourage you, if this kind of thing seems kind of interesting to you, I would strongly recommend, trying to read a little bit more and find out things about these women in their role in Canadian history, because I think it's underappreciated, but super, super interesting. And so if you like Victorian era novels and politics and intrigue and all that kind of stuff, there is some really, really cool stuff. But of course, the other thing to note in this picture is look how white all these people are. So, I don't want to labor on that too much, but Canada in its earliest years was a very, very kind of ethnocentric group of men, and some of their biases really shaped and formed the structure of early Canada and early Canadian history. That covers it for today. I appreciate your following along. I'm looking forward to listening to your podcasts. If you have not turned your podcast into me, you need to get on top of that, or it is going to clobber your term to mark. So if you haven't done that, this is me sending you a last-minute reminder to get me an MP3 file, whether it's on a USB, whether you email it to me, whatever, just get it in my hands so I can give you a mark and you can get a good term to report card. Have a wonderful evening.